Welcome to Keeping the World Company on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today we'll talk about who's winning Trump's trade wars, emerging creative, collaborative countermeasures. What are we seeing? Our co-host for the show is Tim Apicella. Our guest for the show, Benjamin Davis, professor, University of Toledo Law School, and Gene Rosenfeld, independent scholar. Welcome to you all to the show. So, Trump's trade wars are unprecedented, and we do need to study them to examine the economic and trade implications and what is likely to emerge as a result on the global stage. So today we're going to take stock of his trade wars, the planning and rationality of his demands, and the response. Who's winning? Who's losing? Tim, let me start with you. Who's winning? Who's losing Trump's trade wars?
Losing, it will be the United States. Winning, whoever will fill the void of the dominance of the United States in the world market. Remember, tariffs back in the day in the 1900s, early 1900s, was a form, almost the sole source of revenue for the United States. And then there's this little thing called the IRS, taxation that took place, taxing income on wages and taxation of many things. That kind of eliminated the need for tariffs, and I don't think Donald Trump understands that we have revenue coming into the country. What Donald Trump is all up and about is the imbalance of trade. For example, Vietnam and China, we have a huge imbalance. Well, just maybe because the goods and service, or the goods that we produce here in the United States that pays American wages, is so high that those who have low incomes in Vietnam and China can't afford to buy our products. It's not that they can't get access to them, they can't afford them. There goes the trade imbalance. And that's what I think Donald Trump's really upset about. And he has misguided his thinking to think that it's the tariffs that cause all the problems and how the United States is being taken advantage of. So to finalize my answer to you is China will win this war. No sooner was a 46% tariff tax imposed upon Vietnam, China and its delegates were rushing to Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi to discuss how we can fill the void of people who want to buy your product. Vietnam, pants, shirts, shoes, suits, everything.
Ben, it just seems like he's taking advantage of the ignorance of the American people by suggesting these outrageous tariffs. He doesn't have a good rational analysis. The people who are familiar with the matter are saying he doesn't have any way of actually determining the numbers, and he's just making it up and pulling it out of a dark place. So is this going to bounce back on him? Is it going to bounce back on us? Is it going to bounce back on global trade?
I do believe it will bounce back. The particular ways it bounces, I'm not sure. I remember listening to someone talk about this tariff strategy, sort of import substitution strategy that India did, where they raised tariffs on a lot of things. And so what happens is you get a lot of corruption where there's people paying off the government to get an exception. And I think that that's a lot what's going on right now with regard to the administration. Every time you see some kind of exemption being given, I feel like I can hear the ka-ching of the money going from someplace to someplace somewhere. I don't know, but it just, the way that this is going, it would not surprise me. So who wins in this? I mean, I think the coffers of Mr. Trump are filled. There's a second group that I think who are winning, which is the people who have information from the government about what Trump's going to do, which influences the stock market. I was surprised to learn recently that, in fact, it's not insider trading to trade on what the president of the United States tells you. I mean, so if you happen to be one of the buddies or sisters or close, and he tells you, hey, in 3 hours, I'm going to say this, then you can go in the market and buy low or buy high or whatever it is. And then when he announces it, you make a killing. And apparently there are a number of people who've been looking at the trading on the stock exchange who have been commenting about these just before he announces something, incredible spikes in trading that's going on, right? Um, then who loses? Well, everything I hear from government or from an analyst is that the level of volatility in the stock market has increased substantially since he's been in power, and because of that, it increases both the potential costs of capital and interest rates, but also it creates uncertainty for people who have to make investments at 2, 3, 4, 5 year horizons, right? So what do? They hold off. They hold off they defer until they can see a little more clearly about what their investments are. Now, you do hear all these announcements. I think there's an announcement that Trump made at one point that $7 trillion worth of investment has been promised to come into the United States. But I really believe that that is what's called vaporware, which is that companies try to look good with him by announcing vast sums of money that they're going to invest. And then, when you look at to actually what happens, it's not that much. I mean, it reminds me of Elon Musk's famous "I'm going to save the government $2 trillion." Then it became $1 trillion, and then recently he said it was 150 billion. And then somebody did the numbers, and they said the real that you can see numbers that show real stuff. All this craziness saved $62 billion, right? So literally from 2 trillion to 62 billion. It's that same kind uh, of logic, I think, that's going on. As to the part where the U.S. is supposedly negotiating 90 trade deals in 90 days with everybody around the world, again, that's the old salesman story that everybody's buying. Everybody's buying. But, when you try to find out what is the buying, you find out there's nothing. There's nothing there. And maybe, it ends up that there are going to be 50 trade deals with a total amount of countries that do like 2% of U.S. trade, right? But you can say 50 countries signed deals, right? But it's not the big players. It's not the big players. So, that's the so the winners is Trump's pockets and his friends' pockets. The losers are when these tariffs at 10% start hitting everybody. All the middle class and poor Americans are going to be paying a 10% tax on top of whatever they were paying for whatever they were getting before. And given that apparently our stock market has done the worst, at least the Standard and Poor's did the worst since 1928. Okay, let's think about that. And the other one I heard was that Dow Jones, it was since 1932. We're right on our way to a recession. I'm not a recession, depression. We're on our way to depression in the United States. That's what I fear. I'm sorry.
Let me go back for a minute to your comment about him making transactions out of these negotiations. How would that work? We know that there's always money passing hands with Trump. Trump with his hotels and having the Secret Service stay at hotels, in the first administration. But then you keep hearing stories and rumors and reports, that he's actually got his hand in somebody's wallet on every deal.
Yeah.
So the question is, how would that negotiation go with a given country that he is imposed or threatened to impose a tariff on? What would the conversation be?
Well, the conversation, part of the conversation would be something like, we've accelerated the approval for the Trump Hotel here in Hanoi.
Mm-hmm.
Got nothing to do with the United States as a country, has everything to do with lining his pockets. And that has happened already with Vietnam, along with a couple of other things like that. Another version of this would be, let's see, what is it? The Retail Stores Association of America comes to visit him yesterday, right? And they would say, well, we stayed at the Trump Hotel and we donated to this favorite check, whatever. And then Trump says, well, we're going to make an exemption for retail sales under $50, whatever those folks want. I mean, that's it is so quid pro quo, but the idea is really that it's immunity, right? I'm immune. I can do all this, and no one else can do it. and no one is going to be able to do anything about it. That's really, and literally one by one, the car companies get a little deal. Some money was thrown I'm certain some money was thrown at them by the car companies. Whatever the deal is, Apple gets a little deal. Some money's thrown at them by Apple. It's just now. Is it sophisticated? Sure, it could be, but all they have to do is buy some of the meme coins. All they have to do is spend $1 billion on some Trump meme coins, and that it can't be detected. It's cryptocurrency, and they can say, we're with you. They can even show maybe one of the coins they have on their little chest thing or something. You know what I mean? It's all. Or you got lawyers in between. The lawyers are kind of the bag men, if I could, bag women for all of this, right? I'm sorry to say it like that, but having worked in international trade and knowing how lawyers sometimes play roles similar to that, I would not be surprised.
Are you saying, Ben, that we wouldn't find out about it?
I'd say that they are sophisticated enough to set it up so that it's very hard to trace. There's like offshore stuff. You remember that whole thing about Panama and some law firm down in Panama that was doing all kinds of money laundering stuff that, Fonseca something or something like that, and then somebody revealed all the documents and it was just appalling, right? I bet you there's a bunch of those kind of folks. Kind of folks.
Yeah. I was going to mention El Salvador because, what I understand is that, and I wondered about this, and then finally I heard it on the media, is that in fact, Trump is paying El Salvador to keep those prisoners, to keep them. It's not a free deal. It's not like they're doing it for love or for justice or for the American way. They're doing it because he's paying them, and he's paying them with American tax dollars.
Absolutely.
That's really extraordinary. Yeah.
Yep.
And God knows what he's getting back in return, by the way.
Absolutely.
Well, Gene, let me move to you. One thing that we have discussed and which is very troubling is that Trump makes this big list of tariffs that he, made up out of a dark place. And it's country by country by country. And it's different products and different formulae, and it's all different. And I say to myself, how in the world can Europe, for example, act in a collaborative fashion when he is obviously trying to divide and conquer them? You have any thoughts about that?
Well, the tools of a clever autocrat is one of them, divide and conquer. He's using that with the Jewish community and the universities on the question of anti-Semitism, for example. And the problem with the tariffs is that they have unintended consequences. Let's look at the time factor in tariffs. He's betting that over a long period of time, everyone is somehow going to benefit, that he's going to rearrange the relationships, the trade relationships in the whole globe between it and the United States is going to come out okay. Why was he so caught up with the behavior of Jerome Powell and the Fed this past week? Why were there rumors that he wanted to fire Jerome Powell? And that, of course, made the stock market go down. It's because when the tariffs are playing out, everybody suffers. That could be years. And raising interest rates in time of inflation makes sense. Money is less expensive, it has less value. So if you raise interest rates, say from 6 to 8%, that 8% is the same as the 6% was, and the lenders don't lose. He's mostly concerned with the upper part of the economic spectrum. He doesn't want to get blowback from corporations and businesses who really want to go along as everything was the same as usual. They could predict what was going to happen. They can make plans. They can rely upon their incomes. But he's messing around so much with the factors that play into that, namely tariffs, inflation, stagflation, potential depression, which is a part of stagflation. And you can have both at the same time, that people get nervous. Then the stock market goes down. The minute the stock market goes down, his poll numbers go down. And that's the essential thing. He's got to control those poll numbers. So you'll notice that when everything comes too close to home, like the bond market starts getting wobbly and he's very invested in bonds, he backs off. He causes a pause. He changes policy. So policy is related to what's happening to him personally and his cronies in the economic world. And that's why things look so chaotic to us, because the major factor, again, is him and close to home, not the welfare of this country or any other country. And he can't control unintended consequences any more than any individual, no matter how powerful in the world, can control them. He can set them in motion, but he can't determine what's going to happen in early 2026 or late 2026 when he's facing a referendum. If somehow his poll numbers tank because something has set people off regarding the stock market, the economy, or the tariffs.
Isn't he trying to set up Jerome Powell to be the scapegoat here?
Well, he can't easily get rid of him like he can some other people. So he realizes he may have to live with the guy. He'd like to control him. But there are difficulties because the Fed chairman is set up to be very independent. And he also has an impact on the very factions, namely the high corporate world, that Trump needs in his camp. In his first administration, he needed to consolidate his base. He's got that base consolidated at best at 44%, which is not a majority. And sometimes it dips to 40% or 38%. That's what worries him. But he doesn't pay much attention to the base now. Now he's trying to actually set in motion what he wants to accomplish in his personal goals. And he needs an oligarchy to do that. He needs to have the back of the economic players. And so he can only go so far in alienating them. The only time Trump backs off, and he never calls it a lose, is when he loses his support, or it looks like his support is softening with a very essential, critical part of what he needs, who he needs. And who he needs right now are the guys he's playing golf with. And Steve Bannon was onto that. When Steve Bannon came out against Elon Musk, and it was open war between the two of them, Bannon said, you know, to Trump, basically, you're risking with this guy, you're risking losing your base. You're eroding your base. That's what Bannon was worried about. But cult leaders have a cult base that doesn't easily erode. I know that from my own research. We don't call them cult leaders either. But nevertheless, we call them charismatic leaders. Those people aren't going to leave him easily. But when he gets close to losing their loyalty, or it starts to erode in his poll numbers, then you'll see that he backs on. And that makes everything look chaotic, but it makes sense if you understand what's motivating the guy.
Well, maybe you can explain the pause. What was going on with the pause, and why 90 days? And what provoked that? Is that the process you're talking about?
Yes, until he can control the media totally, the media is going to come out with the reality of the situation, and he's going to have to deal with it. And he was getting perilously close to a general negative perception. What a charismatic leader has to do more than anything else is control the perception that he's always winning, that he is the champion, that whatever challenger comes on the scene, he can defeat him, and he can never admit to being wrong. So he always has to have the perception of being a champion.
Let me go to you, Tim. A couple of things occur to me, and that is that if Europe, which is, clearly trying to collaborate, Europe is trying to collaborate on raising their respective contributions to Ukraine, to weapons, and to support funding and all that. If Europe wanted to deal in the best negotiating way with Trump, they would get together, wouldn't they? But it sounds like Trump is going country by country by country and making different proposals to different countries. Your thoughts about all of that?
My thoughts are it's not the EU for nothing. They have to negotiate trade as a bloc, and that's the European Union. They can't cut their own trade deals. Sorry. So if Trump is trying to cut deals with Italy different than England, well, England, he can get away with it. But France or, some other country, it's going to go through the EU to make sure there's consensus and uniformity. So I think it's a lot of wasted effort if someone's making overtures on a separate basis. I wanted to address something that Gene said about his base and how it's important to keep him, but not keep him when he's trying to get this other sector of oligarchs. Ben correctly mentioned that the Association of Retail Stores met. And the thing that shocked, or I think rattled Donald Trump's cages, they said two words: empty shelves. Okay, so if you're a retail entity like Kmart and you get 90% of your products from China, and you now have these dismal numbers of consumer confidence about the economy, what's the first thing that freezes up? Retail sales. First thing. So if I'm Kmart, how much am I going to import? Number one. Number two, pay all these higher tariffs on just so I can get them into the store, into the warehouses. And three, will the demand be there from very scared consumers? He better pay attention to his base, which, by the way, shops at Kmart.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in my mind, he can't abandon that sector of the economy, which is, remember, we were an information technology economy, but we're still heavily reliant upon retail sales. Mm-hmm. And so he's going to have to bridge that fact with the oligarchs that he's trying to woo.
Let me ask a general question among all of you, because I haven't gotten the answer straight watching the news. But so far, what I have come to believe is that Trump has elicited offers from something along the lines of 50 countries, but he has not received or made any deals. Nobody has responded, and no deals have been made with anybody. Does any of you have any information on that?
Let's go back to the history of Donald Trump. 50 could well be 5. He's a bullshitter. He's a carny. He's a side salesman. 50 could well be 5 or less.
How many deals?
No.
I bet he has Vietnam in his pocket. Hard to say how many more than that. Vietnam was crushed at a 46%. I was just in that country. They came running to Washington, D.C. And I don't know if they've cut a deal, but I think China's trying to say, not so fast, Vietnam. Remember who's been your trading partner for 1,000 years.
Yeah, that's true. That's a real consideration, isn't it? Because if somebody breaks and runs from China, for example, and makes a deal with Trump, China is going to be unhappy with that. Do you think that will happen with other countries that have trading relationships with China?
I think what China has been doing, both in Vietnam and Mexico, is saying, okay, we're going to get around these tariffs by just dumping our stuff into Vietnam, have it repackaged, and Vietnam will now be selling it for us. And so I think the Trump administration is on to that. And so that may not work out so well for China.
Yeah. So, Ben, I want to go to you because I'm saving this question for you, Ben.
Uh-oh.
This is the creative question. We know that Canada has been pushing back on Trump, and they haven't really given him anything. Canadians are not traveling to the U.S. for a variety of reasons, including strange detentions at airports and all that. We know that Canadians are not buying American goods. We know that they're pushing back, and you got to give them credit for that. But it does suggest that different countries, different groups of countries would have creative countermeasures, not only to show Trump that he's off base, but also to show the world that they're not giving in. Can you discuss creative countermeasures and how they play in all of this?
I guess part of the question comes down to what particular items you're talking about, right? I mean, for example, I think China imports an enormous amount of American soybeans, right? And then what happened? is that I think back in the 2016 space, the end result was that the Chinese started to import from Brazil soybeans as opposed to the Americans. And a lot of the soybean farmers, are saying that they've lost markets. So that's just a shift in the directions of trade, right? You could expect somebody like China also to be working with, and the European Union to work on strengthening ties with Canada, strengthening ties with non-U.S. countries in the world for purposes of whatever they need. In addition to that, one of the things that is really important for the United States is that there's a large amount of energy that comes to the United States from Canada and through Ontario. And there is always this kind of stick in the background, which is that the Canadians increased tariffs on energy, which hits all of the upper Midwest right away. Boom, just like that, across the Rust Belt, right? And that's always sitting there in the background with the Canadians that I think Trump is very sensitive to, particularly when the premier of Ontario was very aggressively talking about. Now, there's some other issues, which is places like Alberta and all that with their particular oil exports and all that. They're not necessarily on the same. They're on the same team, but they're a little more hesitant than other parts. But it's shifting the directions of trade. It's reducing exposure to the United States, both on the sales side and on the expense side in terms of what you can do. That's probably going on all over the world right now. With new trade relations being developed. We're talking about China and Vietnam. I remember when there was a lot of investment going into China through Hong Kong before 1997, okay? And a lot of that investment was basically Japanese money that was going to Hong Kong and that was then being made into Hong Kong money to be used in China. And I was learning Chinese at the time, okay? And I had my Chinese teacher, and I heard about this path through. And my Chinese teacher, God bless her, may she rest in, I don't know if she's still alive, but she was quite a lady. She said, to survive, you will work with anybody. So given the animosity between the Japanese and the Chinese that goes on for so long, let alone Vietnamese and Chinese or the Koreans and Chinese and Japanese, the attitude of that, to survive, you will work with anybody, that's a pretty deep attitude. And I think that's across Asia and as well as that across Europe, as well as in Canada. That's what they'll do. And in Latin America too. And all of a sudden, it's like a party's going on and then you're standing outside in the cold as the United States and you hear the music going on inside.
Yeah, well, I heard from one commentator that in the past, everyone assumed that trade with Canada was north-south, some goods going north, some goods going south. But they hadn't thought about east and west. They hadn't thought about making deals with China. They hadn't thought about making deals with Germany, for example. Apparently, they're trying to make a deal with Germany right now. And so you have a change in paradigm from north-south to east-west. And I guess I consider that a creative solution. But the question is, will it work? In other words, everyone thinks, they may be wrong, they think that the United States is a requirement. They cannot have an economy without trade with the United States. How do you feel about that? Can they sort of shove off from us and have a life without us?
Well, I mean, this is just my own personal impression, but back in 1997, I went to Hong Kong for the first time, right? And I saw skyscrapers for companies I had never heard of. 40 stories, an Indonesian company or something like that. When I was in Changsha back in 2017, a hugely developed region, right? Then primarily a domestic Chinese market. They don't care about all that export stuff. I mean, that's really how the attitude. We met the head of the region, and he was saying that we're basically domestically focused. So that America stuff and all that around the world stuff is really not of relevance to us. And so there are a lot of places I think in the world where that kind of dynamic is going on. Now, granted, the United States is 25% of the world GDP or something like that, but there's the trade in and the trade out. Where it's going to be more difficult, I would think, is going to be obviously in the questions related to technology, things like that. But even with that, where are the parts coming from, right? So, yeah, I think that America is unfortunately going through a rude awakening right now. And what is really sad is all those people who have 401ks who are like 63 years old, and they just lost 20% of the value in this last 2-3 months. And they're getting ready to retire. And that's all they have because we don't have pensions in the United States. Just think about those people who are going to be eligible for Medicare. Either they're under disabilities or for this whatever the age is, 65, 67. And right now they're getting ready, and what's going to happen to them? Their life is going to be completely upended. Just think about all those people in the United States. We don't I haven't even mentioned Medicaid. I learned something really interesting yesterday, which is that in the United States, with regards to Native Americans, a significant part of the health assistance that is done for Native Americans is done through Medicaid. There's not some separate Bureau of Indian Affairs. They have some part of it, but a bigger part of it is in Medicaid. So what's going to happen to all those folks? Now, but the typical American thing will be what? We're going to try to make people believe that the fault is of the foreigners, right? The foreigners are causing you all the difficulty, right? In the United States, that's what they'll try to get us to be hung up on. But I'm just really sad for all the pain people are going to have. I mean, and the other part of people that I think about is somebody who's 50 or 55. So they got a ways to go before they could retire reasonably. And what is that retirement going to look like for them? Where there's no Medicare or little Medicare, there's their 401k. What's it going to look like? I mean, maybe I'm sounding too depressed. It's not that. It's just I'm more sad for what the pain people are going through that they didn't have to go through. That's the part. 3 months ago, we were talking about the strongest economy in the world. Literally 3 months ago. Way ahead of every other country in terms of development and return from after the pandemic. And look at where we are in 3 months. And I just worry about all this. And of course, let's get younger. The 29-year-old, the 20-year-old, the person who went to college and thought that they were going to get their student loans taken care of, and now they have to repay them because they're switching the game on them. People will have their jobs that are going to be taken by AI. Because when these jobs come back, supposedly, do you think they're going to be hiring people? They'll be using robots. That's been the real dramatic thing, I think, from the last 30, 40 years. It's not been foreign competition, which is a nice thing to blame. It's been the robotization of a lot of the manufacturing that's going on. And I'm not saying robots are bad. I'm just saying that that's the reality, that those jobs on the line that used to be there, that a person could have a decent life and have a house and a car and raise the kids. Those are robots. They work 24 hours. You don't have to worry about health insurance. You don't have to worry about all of the benefits and all. You just depreciate them. That's all. Just think about all those people. Those jobs are not coming back in a way that you think. And then the other part of it, if I could go on, I'm sorry. is that we don't retrain people. I can remember when George Bush was in power, that he came to visit in Hollywood, he came to visit in Toledo, and we were standing out there in the snow with our signs against Bush and all that. And he was there for a meeting to talk about retraining workers in Northwest Ohio. But there's no, the workers like, we love the training, but we want jobs at the end. What about actually a path through to a job, not just going and doing some training at some community college or so. And, that was the part, oh, no, we don't go that far. That's socialism. You know what I mean? But given the realities that people are going through, how would you like to have to be 40 years old and have to reinvent yourself with a spouse and a couple kids, or 50?
So what does this mean politically, Ben?
Well, I think what it means politically is that people are so desperate. And the comment that was made, and I may be wrong on this, but the comment made that why are people, quote unquote, voting against their interests, right? Because they really believe, and they are desperate, that Trump said all the right things to them. He said what they wanted to hear. They said what they wanted to hear, which is what a carny will say to you. And so they hope that that's true. And that's, and then in fact, there's now even, what is it? 25% of the Republican Party are saying that, they want an authoritarian. They want, the strong man. 25% think, judges shouldn't stop Trump, let Trump do anything he wants because he's going to save us. That's a level of desperation that is extremely troubling. I think there are people who believe that really the foreigners are going to pay the tariffs. They truly believe what he says, that the foreigners are going to pay the tariffs instead of them, because they want to believe it.
Gene, let's look at Europe for a minute. And for that matter, let's look at other countries too, Mexico, and really all of Europe, all of Western Europe. So the question is, what happens to them? Do they have the kinds of problems that Ben is talking about? Are they going to be disappointed? Are their economies, either collectively or individually, going to have the same crises that we're going to have?
Well, you have to look at expectations. Expectations in the United States by its citizens are very high. We have taken for granted that we are number one in the world for generations. And the concept that could suddenly tank is not anything people can grasp. There's kind of a shock and numbness that sets in. With other countries, expectations are lower. What we have seen through globalization, which has a bad name now because of political propaganda, is that throughout the world in the last 80 years, since the end of World War II and the Pax Americana that has obtained, there has been a revolution of rising standards of living and expectations. In fact, in contrast to Ben, I would say that if you did a global survey of life and how it has improved or declined for the bulk of individuals in the world, you would find a success story, even though our newspapers and media are full of stories of wars in Sudan, for example, and famines in Africa, and disasters here and there, and so forth. Still, there has been rising standards of living. Why? Open trade, globalization, the spreading of American democratic and capitalist practices throughout the world. They've even been, why is China successful? Because of the opening to China and Deng Xiaoping's openness to adapting American practices with a communist overlay. I mean, they can't admit that they're not communists, but if you look at that mixed economy today, you have to say it resembles something more like Russia's strongman system, not a communist system, a strongman system, that nevertheless allows for entrepreneurial successes. So, in general, I would say they'll cope. They will find new ways around the situation. Individuals, human beings, are great at adapting and creating new modes of success. So, Mexico is still going to be Mexico. Canada is still going to be Canada. The EU is finding new ways to cooperate or come together and form a bloc of its own, which will be a very powerful bloc to replace the United States should it succeed. And I'll tell you, a lot of anti Trump and anti MAGA people in the United States are pinning their hopes on Europe, and some of them are actually relocating to Europe because of that. They've got more people, they've got, as much in terms of resources, and their standard of living in many cases is much higher. So, yeah, I mean, Trump would like to sock them with the cost of defending themselves, which is one reason why they're pro Ukraine. They realize that they will have to pay more money for their military if Ukraine falls. But the fact is, they're ahead of us in a lot of ways. So I don't see that the rest of the world is suffering that much. Yes, they're still suffering in the less developed areas of the world, and we're cutting down aid to millions of people medically and in terms of food. And this has always been true of a certain segment of the world. But for those countries that have benefited from globalization, they're still going to benefit, and they're going to make multilateral ties among one another. That's what I think.
Okay, let's go to final thoughts. Tim, can you go first? Can you tell us what the new world order is going to look like? And you can agree with Jean, or maybe go further.
Well, my final thoughts doesn't necessarily go to the new world order. I'm looking at the old world order for the United States and what's in store for us. New world order is that new trading routes will be developed, new markets will be established, and the United States will be left holding the bag if that happens. What happens for the United States is, again, Trump can pound the desk and get on the airways all he wants and says that Chairman Powell, the Fed chair, is not playing ball with him and rates should come down. But you have to remember the Federal Reserve has been dedicated to controlling inflation since 1980. Paul Volcker, back in 1980, I remember April of 1980, the Fed overnight rate was 19.39%. And if you don't think those days can happen again, I'm here to tell you they can, because number one, tariffs themselves is a tax. Excessive taxes all at once raises the price of goods. That's inflation. Now, you have a very scared market to buy products. So this concern about empty shelves, remember the inflation rate increased when COVID was here and we didn't have supplies on the shelves? We had a supply shortage in the chain and on the shelves. Inflation. So take tariffs plus supply shortage. You're not going to see Fed Chairman Powell reduce interest rates. We may well be above 7%, 8% on the overnight fund rate easily. And I think that spells a lot of trouble for us as a country moving forward. And the rest of the country, of course, when we what's the saying? When we have a cold, the rest of the world has the flu or whatever. So that will disrupt world markets. And I think we're all in for a bad haul here, thanks to Donald Trump destroying the world as far as tariffs. And then that's avalanches into supply shortages. Thank you, President Trump.
Ben, can you go next? And can you try to cover what in the world Trump is actually trying to do with all the media coverage on this, but telling him he's wrong, and the market telling him he's wrong, and yet he persists? What in the world is he trying to do? And how are we going to wind up with less global trade? Because it seems clear from this discussion that global trade is good and the lack of global trade is bad for everybody.
I go back to, I think it was Gene's comment, which is that, he's making money. He's making money. This is all about him making money. There's no vision beyond that personal vision. the thing that I'm looking to watch is when the bond market starts to dump US bonds in exchange for euros. And I don't know how that exactly works, but I know that there's been a rush to gold recently, which is a classic move at this kind of uncertain moment. But one of the things that got Trump really spooked was when the bond market, normally when the stock market goes down, the bond market goes up, right? But this was happening is that people were dumping bonds, so the bond market was going down too. And that is really basically saying we don't have confidence in the United States as a place to invest. So that's the thing I've heard. I don't know if it's true, and Gene, you can correct me on this. Is that relatively this markets in Europe have been doing better than in the United States because there's been kind of a shifting of funds to the European and the euro being a very solid currency vision. So that's the thing that I'm looking at is when do the bonds market really collapse and people start dumping the US bonds? And we've been through this before. In 2008, when Obama came to power in 2009, the markets basically said, welcome to the presidency. See you in 3 months in London, which was basically you're going to solve all this, junk bond, whatever it was, that AAA bond stuff that crashed the entire market, AIG and all that. You're going to take care of all the foreign counterparts, or we're going to drop the dollar. It's like, and so he had 3 months, and he worked very hard to basically pay off all the foreign counterparts, and then it became debt of the United States. So that's the kind of thing I look at is when the world starts to dump the U.S. bonds.
Are you talking about a depression here?
Yeah, yeah. If you really,
that'll affect every man, woman, and child in the country.
I mean, maybe I'm just turning into a pessimist or something. But when somebody says to me that the stock market has gone down the farthest it's ever gone down since 1932 or 1928, that strikes me. And when they're talking about people dropping U.S. bonds in favor of other currencies or gold, I mean, states, not just not just foreign investors, but states. It's like, yeah, I worry about a depression. I do.
Yeah. Well, I'm just to add to that, is we always worry about whether China, who holds hundreds of billions of our bonds and commercial paper, I suppose, if they decide they were going to turn around and punish us by selling out, we're going to have a big problem financially, and the American dollar as a reserve currency would be in great jeopardy, and that would have a secondary effect, wouldn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So, Gene, let me ask you for your final comments about this. It's not a happy picture. Should I be moving to Europe? Should I be selling out everything in my stash? What should I be doing?
Maybe we should all hit a pause, because I don't think there will be a heating up of consequences until before the 2026 election. I think elections really matter. I agree with James Carville on that. I take into consideration what Paul Krugman says repeatedly, that the stock market is not the arbiter of the American economy. They can go in different directions. And we should all take a deep breath, because we don't have, this is such a variety of myriad things that are happening, and they all impinge on one another. Everything's connected to everything else. We don't really have a clear picture of where this is going. And this guy can turn everything around on a dime, he thinks. But there are some things he set in motion that he can't. So he's trying to be very careful. He puts his fingers on the scale, but he wants to take the fingers off before anything consequential to him happens. Consequently, I really don't think that until this referendum occurs in 2026, we're going to have a clear picture of which way the world is going forward. But one thing I will say that my studies have convinced me of is that when you have social disturbances, dislocations, upsets, you get an uptick in human erratic behavior as well. So the chaos spreads. And when you get an uptick in human erratic behavior, and we're already seeing signs of this, and I brought this out before in terms of political attacks and lone wolf attacks on politicians and people who are, well known, that there will be social consequences. And even well before the 2026 elections, we may see an uptick in social disturbances, whether it comes via protests, which I really don't think is going to happen as much as it did during the George Floyd protests, or it's lone wolf attacks, or it's increasing polarization and extreme measures that violate everybody's sense of moral complacency. There will be consequences as we go on if Trump does not moderate his behavior. And I don't think he's capable of that.
No, I don't think so either. Anyway, we're out of time. Thank you very much, co-host Tim Apicella. Thank you to our esteemed guests, Benjamin Davis and Gene Rosenfeld. We'll have to leave it there. I'm Jay Fidell, host of Keeping the World Company. We've been discussing who's winning Trump's trade wars, and we have multiple answers, don't we? So we'll have to continue to follow this going forward. Thank you to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha.
Aloha.